We don't need your pocket change. Dad laughed, tossing my $300K check back across the mahogany table like it was a napkin. This is a $40 million business. Go play investor somewhere else. Mom smirked, adjusting her diamond earrings. They had no idea. They thought I was still the family disappointment working a low-level desk job. They had completely forgotten who actually controlled the venture capital fund, quietly keeping their corporate empire afloat. I kept my face entirely neutral, pulled out my phone under the table, and quietly texted my investment manager. Withdraw all backing from Anderson Holdings immediately. The board meeting started in 10 minutes. Pass the salt, Richard, my mother said, completely ignoring the man sitting right across from her who had just driven 45 minutes to share a Sunday meal. That man was me, Ethan, the designated family disappointment. Around the mahogany dining table, the atmosphere was thick with tension and the smell of expensive roast beef. My father, Arthur Anderson, sat at the head of the table like a petty king on a throne, his phone buzzing incessantly against the wood. Beside him, my sister Chloe picked at her salad, her eyes glued to her screen as she checked real estate listings for a penthouse in downtown Chicago. For the past 2 hours, the entire conversation had revolved around one single topic: the staggering cash flow crisis choking Anderson Holdings. We need another $1 million by the end of the quarter, or the logistics software acquisition falls through completely, Dad muttered, rubbing his temples in frustration. The commercial banks are dragging their feet, and interest rates are crippling us. This was my moment, or so I thought. I cleared my throat, reached into my jacket pocket, and slid a clean, crisp envelope across the polished surface toward my father. I looked over the quarterly projections you sent me last week, I said, keeping my voice steady. I want to help. There's a check in here for $300,000. It should bridge the immediate gap until your secondary line's clear. The room went dead silent. Dad stared at the envelope, then looked up at me, his eyes narrowing into cold slits of pure condescension. Dad didn't even pick up the envelope. He just let out a sharp, dismissive bark of laughter that echoed off the high-gloss ceiling. 300,000? Dad chuckled, shaking his head as if I'd just handed him a coupon for a fast food value meal. What am I supposed to do with your pocket change, Ethan? Buy a new coffee machine for the break room? Mom joined in, letting out a polite, condescending snicker behind her napkin. Really, Ethan? Save your allowance. This is a $40 million corporation we're running here, not a lemonade stand. Go play investor somewhere else where people actually care about pocket change. Chloe didn't even look up from her phone, though a smug smile crossed her lips. Maybe he saved it up from his birthday money, Mom. Don't crush his little corporate dreams. The humiliation rolled over me in a hot, suffocating wave. For years, this was my designated role in the family. While Chloe was showered with praise for managing basic marketing tasks, and my older brother Marcus was treated like an heir apparent before he ran his last apartment into the ground, I was the quiet one. The safe, boring accountant working a mid-level desk job who couldn't possibly understand the high-stakes world of corporate expansion. They looked at me with pure pity mixed with irritation, entirely oblivious to the reality of who was sitting across from them. They had no idea that the modest apartment I lived in and the basic job I worked were just layers of insulation. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they couldn't see the trap closing around them. I kept my face entirely neutral, letting them laugh themselves hoarse. Let them mock me while they still could. What they didn't know, what no one in this room had ever bothered to find out, was that my modest desk job was just a hobby. 5 years ago, after watching my father nearly bankrupt the family business twice through sheer reckless ego, I quietly launched an independent venture capital firm under a corporate shell name, Apex Horizon Capital. While they were busy taking out high-interest commercial loans and mortgaging company assets to keep up appearances, my firm had quietly accumulated a controlling stake in their primary funding channels. I wasn't just some random outside investor offering pocket change. I was the anonymous primary institutional backer keeping Anderson Holdings afloat. Every single financial lifeline they relied on, every structural credit line propping up their multi-million-dollar valuation, ran directly through my portfolio. They thought I was failing because I chose a quiet life away from their toxic corporate theater. They looked down on my accounting background, completely blind to the fact that I used those exact skills to master global financial markets, build a multi-million-dollar portfolio, and quietly position myself as their ultimate financial master. For years, I played the part of the meek, overlooked middle child. I swallowed the insults, brushed off the exclusion at family gatherings, and watched them celebrate victories built entirely on capital I had authorized. But empathy has an expiration date, and watching them sit at their own dining table, laughing at the very person holding their financial lifeline, shattered whatever patience I had left. The illusion was over. I kept my expression completely smooth, leaning back in my chair while the echoes of their laughter finally faded away. Not a single muscle in my face betrayed the storm brewing underneath. "Fair enough," I said quietly, picking up my water glass and taking a calm, measured sip. "Guess my money isn't good enough for Anderson Holdings." "Glad you finally understand, son," Dad muttered, already turning his attention back to his phone as if I had vanished from the room. Underneath the heavy mahogany table, out of sight from their smug expressions, I pulled my smartphone from my pocket. My thumb moved with cold, absolute precision across the screen, opening the encrypted messaging app connected to my private wealth management firm. I didn't hesitate. I typed out a single, definitive command to my chief investment director. "Execute Protocol Apex. Freeze all active lines of credit, recall our revolving loans, and terminate all institutional backing for Anderson Holdings effective immediately." A tiny notification blinked back almost instantly. "Orders received, sir. Processing termination now." I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket, letting out a slow, quiet breath. Their multi-million-dollar corporate empire was built entirely on borrowed time and my capital. In less than 10 hours, every single bank account they owned would lock up tight. The countdown to their total destruction had officially begun, and they didn't even know it yet. The next morning, the glass and steel monolith of Anderson Holdings was usually a place of calm, corporate confidence. Today, it felt like a war zone. I arrived at the headquarters at 8:45 a.m., keeping a low profile near the glass partitions of the main mezzanine. I didn't even make it past the elevators before I heard the shouting. Down the hallway, my father burst out of his executive corner office, his face flushed a violent, mottled purple, clutching his smartphone like it was about to explode. "What do you mean, frozen?" Dad roared into the phone, his voice echoing off the polished marble floors and freezing administrative assistants in their tracks. "We have payroll hitting in 12 hours. That revolving credit line is guaranteed by our primary institutional backer." Mom came scrambling out of her adjacent office, her diamond earrings shaking as she gripped her tablet. "Arthur, it's not just the credit line. The corporate operating accounts are locked. The automated clearinghouse just bounced our vendor payments for the logistics expansion." Panic, sharp and immediate, radiated through the entire floor. Executives and department heads were darting back and forth, whispering frantically, staring at screens flashing red error codes. The routine morning briefings had completely derailed. Just then, my sister Chloe rushed out of the marketing wing, her face pale under her makeup. "Dad, the commercial bank says our primary equity partner pulled their liquidity backing completely overnight. They severed the entire portfolio pipeline. Without that emergency cash injection, the board meeting in 10 minutes has nothing to discuss except bankruptcy." Dad staggered back against the glass wall, the terrifying reality crashing down on him. Their $40 million empire wasn't failing slowly. It was bleeding out in real time, and they had absolutely no idea who held the knife. The double glass doors of the boardroom swung open, and Richard Morrison, the senior managing director of our primary institutional investor firm, strode down the executive hallway. He didn't look like a man here to negotiate a routine loan extension. He looked like an executioner. My father rushed forward, a desperate, fake smile plastered across his face, his hand outstretched. "Richard, thank God you're here. There seems to be a catastrophic administrative error with our liquidity accounts." Richard didn't take his hand. He walked right past him, stopping only when he reached the head of the mahogany conference table where the board members were already murmuring in panic. "There is no administrative error, Arthur," Richard said, his voice cutting cleanly through the noise of the room. Apex Horizon Capital has officially recalled all portfolio lines and severed institutional backing for Anderson Holdings. Mom turned white as a sheet, clutching her tablet to her chest. Recalled? They can't do that without a formal review. Who authorized that? Who is running Apex? Richard turned his gaze slowly around the room, letting the heavy silence build before he answered. That would be your younger son, Ethan. Every head in the boardroom snapped toward the glass partition by the hallway. I was standing there casually, hands in my pockets, watching the color drain entirely from my father's face. Dad stared at me through the glass, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The man he had laughed at less than 24 hours ago, the son whose $300,000 offer he had mocked as pocket change, was the exact person holding the multi-million-dollar dagger to his company's throat. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. My father looked as though he had aged 10 years in 10 seconds, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the conference table. Mom sank heavily into a leather chair, completely stripped of her usual arrogance. I pushed the glass door open and walked slowly into the room, stopping right beside Richard. You, Dad choked out, his voice barely a whisper. You did this to your own family? No, Dad. I replied, my voice calm and steady. I offered to help you yesterday, and you laughed in my face. You called my money pocket change. You chose your arrogance over reality. I just gave you what you wanted, total independence from me. Richard placed a folder on the table containing the restructuring terms. Anderson Holdings is insolvent without Apex Capital. Effective immediately. The board is placing Arthur and Victoria on administrative leave pending an asset liquidation review. They didn't argue. They couldn't. I turned and walked out of the building, stepping into the warm afternoon sunlight. For the first time in my life, the heavy weight of their expectations was entirely gone. I didn't look back, and I didn't feel a shred of regret. I climbed into my car, started the engine, and drove away into a future that was entirely my own.